Coffee cupping is not just for professionals, and it's easy and fun to do at home. Whether you're looking at specialty coffee for yourself or your friend, or you're doing flavor profiles for home roasted coffee, this is a fantastic skill to develop your palate. So let's get into it. So let me tell you everything that you'll need to do a coffee cupping at home. First, you'll need at least 2, but preferably 3 or more different kinds of coffee so you can taste them side by side. It's very difficult to understand the flavor of a coffee by itself, so you should taste multiple coffees at the same time to compare. All of these coffees are less than a week off their roast date, so make sure that you get fresh coffee beans. Other than that, you just need a scale, a grinder, a couple of bowls, and a couple of spoons in order to do a coffee cupping. This is mostly stuff that you should have in your kitchen anyway, and I also like to have a glass of sparkling water along with my coffee cupping so that I can cleanse my palate between tastes. But you can have just a glass of still water or nothing at all. Let's also talk about how to taste coffee. It sounds really strange, but you kind of have to teach yourself how to taste different flavors in coffee. I've made a little tasting sheet which you can download from the link in the description below. You don't have to sign up with your email address or anything, it's just a one-click PDF download which you can use for free and share as you like. The point of the tasting sheet is just to direct your attention to the different levels of flavor in the coffee and to see how much you like that coffee so you can remember for next time if you want to continue roasting in that way or buying the coffee from the same place. This will also help you to develop your palate and understand what kind of flavors to pull out of your roast next time or what kind of coffees you like to buy. As I go through the cupping process, I'll reference the tasting sheet as I try these 3 different coffees that I've roasted 3 days ago. The first one is an Ethiopian Yirgacheffe coffee, the second one is a Guatemalan peaberry, and the third one is a Costa Rican coffee. I've also included a link to the SCAA coffee tasting wheel, which is a useful tool for figuring out which flavors of coffee we're looking for, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later. I've roasted all of these coffees to a medium light roast just past the first crack. Now, if you're not interested in coffee roasting, that's totally fine. You can still do a coffee cupping with coffee that you've bought from a local specialty cafe that's just been roasted. If you're interested in how I roast my coffee, I did a video about the Jenny Cafe roaster which I use at home, which you can take a look at in the description below. Now let's get into the recipe. The recipe and process for coffee cupping is pretty simple. All you have to do is grind the coffee to a similar level you might do for a pour over, something along the lines of granulated sugar or just a little bit finer than that. Next, you should measure the ratio of coffee to water. I usually go with about 15 grams of coffee to 200 milliliters of hot water, and I make sure to do it in a cup that's big enough to allow room for the coffee to bloom. Now, they have fancy cupping bowls that are available, but any cup you have will do as long as there's enough room and there's a wide enough brim to allow lots of oxygen to get to the coffee grinds. So I'll talk you through the process as I'm doing each step. First, grind out your coffee. Make sure you use a little bit of the second coffee to clean out the grinder after the first one before putting in your 15 grams of weighed coffee second. This is to make sure that you don't have 2 separate coffees getting mixed up and blending in between. Next, you should pour your hot water on top, freshly off the boil, and make sure that you measure out 200 grams of hot water. We're going to leave this for about 4 minutes to steep, similar to how we might do for a French press. So after you've waited about 4 minutes, the coffee has steeped long enough and it's formed this kind of crust on top of the coffee. So I'm going to use this little cute spoon to push through this crust and allow some of the grinds to go to the bottom, and then we're going to clean them off the top so that we can actually taste the coffee. Now, the point at which we break the crust, this is when you want to smell the aroma and take notes for your tasting chart. This is when the smells are the strongest and you get the best, most interesting flavors from this coffee. So I've got my cupping form here, and the first coffee, the Ethiopian Yirgacheffe coffee, it was kind of a light roasted coffee, so I think the roast level was about a 5, so not too light, but a good sort of medium roast. And the intensity of the aroma coming off this was really high. I'd say like an 8 or a 9. It was really quite a strong smell. It wasn't my favorite smell. Often I get the sort of blueberries and fruits and citrusy vibe and floral vibe from Ethiopian coffee, but this one wasn't quite as interesting a flavor for me for the aroma, so I'm going to probably make this like a 6 or a 7. So this is just a subjective view. This is not an objective measure like how good is this coffee, it's just how much I liked it. So don't worry about getting it wrong. There is no wrong answer for coffee cupping flavors. So just do it how you like. So at this point, we're going to take these 2 spoons and we're going to use them to sort of remove that crust off the top. There's a little bit more of the sort of foam and maybe a few grinds on the top of the coffee, which we want to get rid of. So you can just get your spoons and you can kind of go like this and just sweep them around and pull off that excess foam and dip it into your water cup, like so. So now comes the difficult part, which is waiting around 8 to 10 minutes for the coffee to cool down sufficiently. If you just taste freshly brewed hot coffee, you're mostly just going to taste hot. Just as with wine tasting, you're not actually going to drink the coffee. You spit it out discreetly into a separate cup and then wash off your spoon between tasting different coffees. So I think I have a reasonable palate for coffee, but I want to warn you against being too picky and too specific about the kinds of tastes that you find in the coffee. So a lot of cafes will have on their tasting cards something like muscat or peach or almonds, but really, if you're not a professional coffee taster, it's very hard to actually taste those specific flavors in a coffee. What you might taste instead is berries or nuts or chocolate, something that's a little bit more broad, and that's totally fine. Don't be hung up on saying the most specific thing, like this tastes like blueberries or muscat or something. It's like, it's much better if you just taste the coffee. And if you do taste something really specific, like a lot of Ethiopian Yirgacheffe coffees might taste like blueberries, then definitely take it down. But you don't have to be too specific. So my advice when looking at that SCAA flavor wheel that I told you about earlier, look for the flavors on the inside of the wheel rather than the flavors on the outside first. As you develop your palate over years of tasting different coffees, you'll be able to be more specific. But with the broad flavors, I'm able to agree with almost everyone else who tastes the same coffee what flavors we're tasting. So go for the simple broad flavors before you go for specific ones. My coffees have cooled down enough now to taste, and so I'm going to start off with my Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. There's something that a lot of coffee tasters will do, which is this weird whistling, slurping thing. I'm not going to do that. You don't have to do that. It's supposed to be a way to coat the whole of your inside of your mouth so that you can taste it at every level and introduce more oxygenation, which increases the intensity of the flavor. But personally, I think it seems a little bit strange and sounds weird, so I'm just going to sip the coffee like a normal person. So I'm definitely tasting some floral and some citrusy notes in this coffee, maybe something a little bit earthy as well. So it's a really interesting mix of flavors, but I also want to draw your attention to the other kinds of things that we'll taste with each coffee. So it's not just the flavors, which you can note down as you find them, but it's also acidity, body, and sweetness. So a lot of coffee professionals really love acidity in coffee, much more than the average consumer like you or I. But the thing with acidity is it's very different from sourness. Sourness is generally a really unpleasant feeling, but acidity is great. And a lot of the foods that we like apples and pineapples, they would taste much more boring without that tart acidity. In coffee, and especially in lighter roasts, you can bring out some acidic flavors, and this Ethiopian coffee has a really pleasant, interesting acidity to it. So while I really enjoyed the acidity in this coffee, it's not particularly intense. It's maybe a 5 or a 6 in terms of acidity, which is about the level that I would enjoy it. In terms of body, it's not a particularly rich drink. This tends to be true of lighter roast coffees. If you get a darker roast coffee, they tend to have a little bit more body because of the oils that have come out of the beans in the roasting process. This coffee is definitely light on body, which isn't a bad thing. It gives it that kind of clean, fresh, crisp kind of flavor. Finally, let's take a look at sweetness. Now, coffee doesn't generally tend to be sweet. Most people think of coffee as very bitter. However, if you've been subscribed and following this channel for a little while, you know that really well-roasted specialty coffee that's brewed in the correct way can dial down the bitterness a lot and can taste very sweet all by itself without milk or sugar. Now, this Ethiopian coffee somehow tricks my brain into thinking that it's sweet because the bitterness is dialed all the way down and it tastes very fruity. So I'm going to give this one maybe an 8 or a 9 on sweetness. Okay, so let me try the other coffees and I'll go through my tasting notes with each one. So this one is a Guatemalan peaberry. Now, coffee usually grows in a cherry with 2 beans kind of facing each other, which is why you have a sort of flat side and a rounded side of the coffee bean. Pea berries have taken up the whole cherry, and there's only one bean inside each one, which tends to give them more density and more resources from the plant because they didn't have to share the cherry with another coffee bean. Now, the importer listed some flavours that are supposed to come out of this coffee bean, but I don't generally pay too much attention to the importer's flavour notes, because most of it will just be marketing and you probably won't find those flavours in the roasting that you do. When it comes to coffee cupping, I don't want my taste to be influenced by what the importer says, so I generally ignore these notes and I pick out the flavours by myself. So I'm taking notes on the flavours from my Guatemalan now, and I'm definitely tasting some kind of chocolatey flavours and also some nutty flavours, maybe like almonds or milk chocolate and tastes like that. So I'm going to add that to my flavours, and it also kind of influences the sweetness because I feel like a very strong sweetness coming from this coffee too. Compared to the Ethiopian, it's really not very acidic. I do like it with this one, but I much prefer the sort of acidity coming from the Ethiopian coffee. So I'm going to give this one a rating of about 6 in terms of the actual enjoyment of the acidity, and the intensity is probably about a 2 or a 3. It's a very mild coffee with very low acidity. The body is around the same as it is for the Ethiopian, but this one I find it a little bit less interesting. So the Ethiopian has that fresh, crisp taste, whereas this Guatemalan one, I feel like with the chocolatey, nutty flavors, I'd like it to have a little bit more body. Okay, so I'm going to try my third coffee now, which is a Costa Rican bean. I roasted a little bit, tiny bit darker than the Guatemalan or the Ethiopian coffee. It's weird, this one tastes a little bit stronger than the other ones, and it's kind of like a stone fruit, like a peach or a nectarine, but nowhere near as sweet, but just it has that kind of dark, maybe cherry-like flavor to it. It's definitely low on acidity and has a little bit more body than the Guatemalan or the Ethiopian coffees. I'm not getting very much sweetness from this one. It's still enjoyable to drink, so I do quite like that, but it is quite a mild flavor overall. The Coffee Quality Institute rates beans from different countries, and Costa Rica consistently comes up 6th in terms of their quality of their coffee beans from multiple different roasters, multiple different years, and different tasters. Now, I've always enjoyed coffee from Costa Rica, but this is my first time roasting coffee from this particular farm. Overall, I'd have to say that the Ethiopian is probably my favorite coffee. I'd rate it probably a 8 or a 9 overall in terms of flavor, and then the Guatemalan and then the Costa Rican at maybe a 7 and a 6. They're all really interesting, different flavored coffees, and the Ethiopian just seems like the one that I would really enjoy to have as pour over or French press, and I'd be very comfortable giving it to a friend and saying this is a tasty coffee. So now you know how to do a coffee cupping at home. Let me know in the comments if this helped you and what your favorite flavors of coffee are. I'm putting out a lot more videos recently, and I really appreciate it when you guys share these videos with your friends. And especially I want to say thank you to people who recently joined my Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/homecafe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. I'm going to try my third coffee now, which is a Costa Rican... Click. We're going to leave this for about 4 minutes to steep, similarly? That's a new word I just invented. And about 200 milliliters of hot water just off the boil. Hot water? You can still do this with local specialty coffee roasted by a coffee thing. Oh. Okay. Ah! Ooh. I feel like I'm doing that Family Guy thing.